Okay, sorry I'm a little bit late. I'm gonna check some settings really quick. So first things first, turns out if you're smart, that wasn't really smart files, it was the shape layers. If your shape layers are being really slow, you have to move your app data roaming Photoshop files out of that folder and start again, and that'll fix the issue. But now my Photoshop is kind of back to factory restart, so that kind of threw me for a loop this morning. Hey everybody, thanks for showing up. In case you weren't aware, we are going to be doing, if you see this link down in the lower right hand corner, the zbrushguides.com/tutorials, we're going to be going over the stylized rendering here. So we're going to be going through, and this is Pablo Munoz Gomez's Poblander. He's a guy who runs ZBrush Guides. We're going to be going through these files. I went through these just to kind of brush up on stylized rendering, and this is a free guide. You can download it and follow along if you want to, or just watch along. This is going to be a companion video, so I'm recording so I can edit it a little bit later and then make it a little bit nicer when I put this on YouTube. But we're going to go through this and kind of dig a little bit deeper, because as I was going through this, I realized that it might be a little bit nice to have a companion video to this resource so you can kind of see it happening on the screen and where to click the menu and a couple other options that you can kind of go through. So give me a second, I'll be right back, and then we'll get started. Sorry, I had to get some warm sink water. Okay. I think we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get cracking here. So first thing, I'm opening up. Let's go ahead and show you where I'm at. So if I go to my streaming folder, we're doing comic book rendering. In this comic book rendering folder, there's going to be a guide to ZBrush comic style rendering. That's what I'm using to kind of go through this, and it's a pretty long document, so we're probably not going to finish it all today. But we'll get started, and then in here you're going to have alphas, matcap images, material, OBDs, Photoshop templates, etc., etc. So as we go through here, we'll be pulling resources from here to start with, and eventually what I'd like to do, and we might do this in later streams too, or on the Pixelogic stream as well, if I go to streaming, ZBrush female high res, I don't have her latest file here downloaded, but let me go ahead and launch her up. I'll be posing and rendering this file. We've been kind of going back and forth on this lovely lady here for quite a while. So we got her pretty much finished out. We got if you saw my Facebook post, my Twitter post, that she's pretty much about as done as I'm going to take her tech suit, and then we're going to add the armor, and then we're going to put her in her mech suit, possibly, depending on how far we want to go with this. But she's pretty much done, so we'll do a little bit of comic style rendering with her. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and do delete all and start over again, and we're just going to start fresh here. So I'm going to go out of edit mode, control, clear my canvas. So we're going to be hopping back between ZBrush and Photoshop a little bit, but mostly we're going to be staying in ZBrush, going over some basic file structure and material settings, so we can kind of learn a little bit more about light cap, matte cap, all while we're going through this resources. And I'll be keeping my eye on the chat over here. I probably won't be as responsive as well, not that I'm overly responsive to begin with, but if I miss your questions, I apologize. I might go back through at the end, just because, and I can always keep notes of any questions you ask. I can throw those in my streaming topics if I don't get to them today, because I'm going to be focused over here for the most part. But I'll try and keep my eye over here, and any questions that pop up, I'll try and answer them over here. Question, am I a Croat? I think I was. I mean, we're talking generations back. I've heard Croatia. Back in the day when Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia were countries. Somewhere in there. I've heard Russia, I've heard the Ukraine, so I'm not really sure. Thanks for showing up, everybody. All right, if everybody's kind of running, and I am recording this and also streaming on Twitch, so if I am going to go ahead and edit this later on and put it up on YouTube. So it'll be a little bit more concise, and I'll cut out all this beginning preamble. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we have the PDF open over here, and here's his preamble, basically the resources folder we already talked about, and you know, the intro here, and illustration, and kind of getting these comic style renders and consistency. He also has a lot of links to, you know, like just like Jim Lee and McFarlane and, you know, the Hellboy comics that, you know, have these really, really classic comic styles, and we'll be able to do that in real time in ZBrush as we get a little bit further along. But first we have to learn how to manipulate our materials within ZBrush. Okay, so yeah, dynamic poses and perspective. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and load up one of his resources here. So let's go ahead and go to my streaming, comic rendering, resources, and we're going to go to Z Tools, and we'll grab that Kepler bust here. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and drag that out on my canvas, go into edit mode, hit F to frame, and I am working a little bit smaller than I usually do in ZBrush, obviously. I'm going to probably have both of these open, but you can still see what's going on in the middle here, so I'm not overly concerned. But if we ever need a little bit more room, I can always pop these things out, and we can kind of study what's going on in here. But we'll go ahead and leave these open for now and talk about some of this. So here we go, talk about perspective and camera angle, which we'll get to in a little bit. Basically, if you have perspective, that's the P key, on and off. So when you're doing comic rendering, you probably don't want an orthographic view because you're going to have like a small head and a big body because, you know, there is no focal length here. So if I turn perspective on or hit P, that's where you get the really dynamic angles. And if you really want to overcrank that, grab your draw menu. And any of these menus here, if you're not aware, you can dock. You can click these little dividers to open and close these docking stations. And if I go over here to the draw menu, I can drag this over. And, you know, perspective is in here as well as this angle of view. By default, it's at 50. I'll probably leave it there, but if you really want to undercrank that, 5 will put it more than orthographic. And if you really overcrank that, that'll give you that kind of, remember those 90s drawings they used to do, those extreme, you know, little weirdo trapper keeper kind of paintings they used to do where everything was like really an extreme angle. You can kind of do that as well. So you can kind of, if you want to play with the drama of your scene, you can crank up that angle of view there. So I'm going to put that back to 50 here, and we'll keep moving along. So harsh shadows and contrast, and I'll let you read this. Again, if you're just joining us now, it's ZBrushGuides.com/tutorials, and that's where you can kind of follow along there. Yeah, actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and do that. Good point. Let's see. ZBrush. I will post the link. Go here. There you go. Hop on there, and that is we're looking at the free ebook there, the ZBrush Comics style renderer there. That's a PDF and all the resources as well. And there's some really cool materials in there. I think you guys are going to like it. Yeah, and we could definitely do some tutorials about like Blizzard style armor. Really, it's just about your basic forms and then doing a little bit of wear and tear, which I'd probably do at this point in Substance Painter, as far as even that and the detailing, depending on what you're making. As far as like if it's going to go into World of Warcraft and actually run with their poly limits and their texture sizes, that might be a little bit different. But it's been a while since I've done that kind of stuff. But cool. Alrighty. Yeah, so restricted color palettes and rim lights here. So we can kind of get this here, and then the more advanced user. So we'll be going through all of this and pretty much word for word and just kind of breaking this down. So, okay, here's Kepler, and this is his Kepler character there, which we just loaded up. And what we're going to be doing, the techniques, we're going to be using light cap, matte cap, Photoshop matte cap, and then mixing shaders with matte cap. So basically, light cap is a way to create your own matte cap. And the matte cap, if you didn't know, is right here. And if you also want to learn a little bit more, if you're new to ZBrush altogether, let me go ahead and link you. Sorry, I should have these links open. I wasn't thinking. Playlists. There we go. So if you go to this playlist right here, this is my YouTube channel, you can actually go to Intro to ZBrush Part 1. That'll walk you through the basics of ZBrush. And then if you want to continue on, Intro to ZBrush Part 2 and Part 3 is pretty good. And if you want to go back through previous episodes that we've done on my live stream, you can go to the live stream full episodes or the live stream highlights. So, Anyway, we've got our guy right here, so let's talk a little bit about materials. So here's our matte cap materials, and here's our standard materials. The basic difference is if I close this draw menu out and we grab our material menu and drag that over, you're going to see with a matte cap material selected, and that's these ones up here. Let's go ahead and choose an obvious one like droplet. What's basically causing this thing to render this look in real time is this texture right here. If we open up this modifiers here and scroll down, you're going to see there's a little droplet file in there. If we choose another matte cap, like matte cap red wax, you're going to see there is two spheres in there, and that is basically A and B transitioning between each other. I know this is getting a little bit ahead, but I just want to have you realize the difference between this type of shader, which is the look is being driven by just basically an image, which is pretty powerful and pretty cool, as we get there to kind of modifying those two, as opposed to something like the basic material, where those ones, you'll notice, these are matte cap, these are standard. So your basic materials under the standard material. And this one has a bunch of different settings that you can kind of play with in here as far as diffuse and specular curves and all that stuff. And you're going to see you can put a texture in here, but it behaves a little bit differently than the matte caps. Lighting affects matte caps a little bit differently than basic materials. So if you go over here to the light menu and we dock that over here, this light menu we can move, see how we can move that light around and it affects the material. And in fact, you can turn on multiple lights if you want to, and multiple lights will affect this material as well. However, if you go do a matte cap, and we'll go back to that matte cap gray here, you're going to see as I move this light around, it doesn't affect the material at all. The only thing this light will do is tell the shadow which direction to go into. So if we go to our BPR render here, and that's a best preview render, you're going to see with my light over here, the shadow is casting in the right direction, but it's not affecting how my material or my object is being drawn, because all that lighting information is baked into this material on this texture right here. So hope that makes sense. It'll make more sense as we move forward and we start digging into light cap materials and the material properties for the matte caps. So quick basic overview here. Let's see, make sure I didn't miss anything here. Oh yeah, and the BPR render, just while we're demoing, I'm going to take this SPIX down to 1. That's the anti-aliasing render quality. If you are doing this for real, then I would leave it at 3 or even higher if you want to, but actually we'll turn it down to 0 because it's just going to render a little bit faster, and it looks fine in a demo purpose, especially since I'm outputting this at 1280 by 720, so who cares. But cool, and cool. Yeah, keep asking. Yeah, like I said before, keep asking questions. I'll throw those up on the live stream notes that I can go over later, unless it's pertinent to, you know, light caps or anything I'm doing here that doesn't make sense. Shout it out. Let's see. So Photoshop matte cap, creating matte caps within ZBrush. So here's the cool thing. So the ZBrush matte cap right here, you have that available to you. The Photoshop matte cap, you can basically go into Photoshop and create your own little texture swatch, and that will create lighting within ZBrush, so that's going to be really cool. And then of course you can mix these using the S1, S2, S3, and S4. We'll get there in a bit. Let's see, outlines and Photoshop finishing, and this is just going into Photoshop and kind of finishing it out. And there is Photoshop functionality within ZBrush when we get to the, if we go here to the render menu, where are we at? Render. You're going to see there is BPR filters, and all of these, like here's noise filter and stuff. So when we hit BPR and then we go into the render settings, we'll be able to change these. If we turn this on, you see you can filter noise, you can do posterization, you can do colorize, hue, saturation, intensity, levels, adjustments, that kind of thing can all be found within these BPR filters. So, and it's all real time as well. So, you know, with this filter, you can update those on the fly. So we'll go back in here and we'll turn that off. But we're not going to get there for a while. Just wanted to let you guys know that there is actual even Photoshop capability within ZBrush in real time if you wanted to kind of use that to kind of previs in ZBrush before you head over to Photoshop. Okay. And we're going to start out technical, like he says here, but it's good to kind of just see these things working in a technical application so you can kind of tell with simple objects how the matte caps are working. So matte cap is short for material capture, and it captures the lighting and reflections in an environment. There are a few ways to create a matte cap, but we'll get into what we're going to talk about here. So let's go ahead and go into the resources folder, and we're going to import. So this one I did a load tool, and we loaded the Kepler bust. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out of edit mode, Control N to clear my canvas. And we'll click the simple brush here, because if I have this selected and I go to import, it might replace that object in my subtools here with that object, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to import, and we're going to go to resources, and we're going to go to the resource folder, obj, matcap objects tester, obj. We're going to go ahead and import this, drag it on our canvas, go into edit mode, and there we go. So now we're caught up. And next. Cool. Okay, so I found these objects, simple forms. Okay, so these are just really simple forms here, and now what we need to do is go ahead and load up a material called RGBY testing materials, Z material. There's a couple different ways you can load materials. The way we're going to do it right now is going in here, and you're going to want to choose a material that you're not going to use that much if you're going to, because what it's going to do is basically replace that material. So I'm going to go over here to like matcap Sculpey 2, and then I'm going to go to my material palette here, and we're going to go to load under our resources and materials here. There is RGBY testing matcap ZMT, and that's a Z material. RGB testing Y testing, not K. There we go. So we'll go ahead and load that up. And basically what that did was load up that material. And again, like I said, it replaced that material there. So be careful that you choose one that you're not going to use. Another alternative to that, if I hit the comma key here and we go to the material folder, you're going to see I have some materials in here. So if I want those materials to be available to me when I hit comma, or any of his alphas or any of his textures in here, you can go into, let's go ahead and talk about that. Go into File Explorer here. We're going to go to ZBrush 4R8. So Program Files, Pixel Logic, ZBrush 4R8. And if we go to Z Materials here, I'm going to put a folder in here, new folder, and we're going to call this Comic Style Rendering. And then I'm going to go to my resources folder here, streaming, comic rendering, resources, and there's the material folder in here. So if I just copy these in here, now whenever I hit the comma key and you go to material, you're going to see there's a comic style rendering folder in there, and then you can double click that, and then here is all your materials available to you. Here's the RGB testing that we're using now. So a couple different ways to do that. When we get into the alpha stuff, I'm going to copy those in there as well, just to kind of get a little alpha preview in there as we work. So I'm going to hit comma key to get rid of that light box there. And here we go. So first thing I would like you to do is turn the perspective on and off, just so you can see the perspective doesn't affect how the materials are displayed. So as I rotate this thing around, if I hit P and toggle that on, it's not going to change how the materials react to the surface there. All right, and if we go over here to the matcap, basically one channel with image. So we have our material. So here's our material menu right here. If you scroll all the way down with that material selected, you're going to see there's a image in here, and it's 4 squares, super basic colors here, and that is what's driving the rendering, real-time rendering of these low resolution folder, or these low resolution objects right here. So now frame the objects and snap them to the front view. So as you're rotating, hold down Shift, and that'll snap them to the front view here. And then you can either hit this frame button over here or hit F to kind of frame those here, and that'll kind of put those right smack dab in the center and make them fill up the canvas as we're working. Okay, so he's going to say, pay attention to the left row while you slowly rotate the object, clicking and dragging up and down like this. So as we drag this object down, check out how the colors are changing. You see as I drag up and then repeat the rotation, but this time keep your eye on the row at the right. What you'll see is that the transition colors is smoother on the right and more abrupt on the left. So as I'm dragging this up, you're going to see how they're kind of popping into view. So as I go, see how it goes pop, pop in between here. Right in this area is a really obvious one. As I'm rotating, it's really just having a harsh transition. And then over here, you're going to see it's actually having a pretty gradual, smooth transition between shapes. And over here is pretty obvious too. And this one isn't changing at all because I think it only has 4 sides. So we'll get to that in a bit. Interesting. And the reason for this is the difference of amount of geometry in the object. So if we want to see that, what we can do is go over here to Polyframe, and you're going to see, for example, this object right here just has a few polygons representing the shape, and then over here it has a ton of polygons representing that shape. So the more polygons you have, the smoother the transition is going to be as it's transferring between this blue and this red, for example, on the left-hand side. And okay, so what he says here is no matter how much we rotate the models, the blue and the green colors will always stay at the bottom and the red and yellow at the top. So the blue and the green are always at the bottom, no matter how we rotate these things around, or if we try and flip, turn upside down. And in fact, if we go hit W and we rotate these things around, see as I'm moving these things around, the blue is always in the lower left and the green is always in the lower right. Again, that's because this image down here is dictating how these things are colored. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to that Kepler model here. I'm just going to click that, and we'll go out of polyframe mode. And you can do just Shift F if you want to. And as we look at him, you're going to see the same thing is still true on a more complex object. You have all the upward left-facing red and all the upward right-facing yellow, and then green and blue at the bottom here. And these are based on the normal angles of all the individual little faces in this scene are dictating if they get red, blue, or green. And the center of the image is used by the matte cap where the four colors meet. Is actually the point that is facing the camera directly. So this spot right in here is dictating. So here you can see where they meet right there. That's what's facing the camera directly. So yeah, right here. And I don't have one that snaps directly to the middle, but if this was pointed straight forward, you would see, yeah, these polygons right here are going to be where those things meet. All right, so now we're going to load up the RGBYK testing matcap Z material. So let's go back to our object here, hit F to frame, and then hold down Shift, and we'll snap this thing like so. And now instead of this material, now with this material loaded, I can just go ahead and replace that. Again, I'm going to hit my comma key. So we talked about copying those into this folder here. And let's check out RGBYK testing. If I double click this, that's going to replace this material with this. And if I hit comma key, that'll get rid of it. And now you're going to see in this texture here, there is black in the middle. Now, when you import pure black into ZBrush, it'll give it transparency, as you can see here. But in this case, it's actually coloring the object here. So, the only thing that happened, like I said, was this texture was replaced with a black circle in the middle of it there. And that is just to kind of show off, you know, when something is facing directly at the camera, it's going to inherit what's in the middle of this object. So you can kind of use this to shade as well. And you're going to notice up here in the upper left-hand corner, there is no black. You know, you can make this one, this face the camera, and it will inherit this black coloring there. But when we're straight on, there is no polygon that is straight facing the object or the camera here. So there is going to be no black on this particular object there. Rotate the object 180 degrees and things are quite different. The pyramid now at the top right is just black because the base is a single polygon with the front normal. So if we rotate this all the way around, you're going to see because this base is just a flat normal that faces directly at us, it turns pure black. You can kind of see an outline over there. Let's see if we can hit BPR. Yeah, so you can kind of see a slight outline of those different colors from this side. But yeah, because these are just facing us, and even this flat one over here, all these flat faces here are in an angle threshold low enough to where, because it's facing straight at us, all of this just turns black there. And then we'll go back to the Kepler character here. There we go. So now wherever the polygons are facing exactly at your camera, those are going to turn black. It's a pretty cool look. So now we're going to load in another testing material called RGBYW testing. So let's go ahead and hit our comma key. And we'll go ahead and grab this RGBW. And like you probably already guessed, this material, instead of having black in the middle, has white in the middle. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and we're now going to take a look at the two very important things for our comic book look. The first one is how to get the outlines that describe the volumes of the sculpture, and the second one is how to alter the range or depth of the matte cap. So make sure you turn off the polyframe, which we already have, and so this effect is more evident here. And one way we can achieve the outlines from the matcap is by tweaking the cavity detection and cavity transition values. Intensity A and B are also relevant here. So let's change the cavity detection to 1, and you'll see that the colors are less bright and the outlines in the model are pure white. So here's cavity detection here. We're going to change this to 1, and as I drag this up, you're going to see what that's accomplishing. Like it says before, the colors are less bright, so it's desaturating the colors. It's adding a little bit of gray in there. And then it's also creating white along every single little polygon. Because this is a decimated mesh, you're going to see the triangulation in the model there. Cool. Cavity detection to 1, and if you want to invert this, we're going to change our cavity transition to 1. So if you take the cavity transition, it's at -1 by default. If we start dragging this towards 0, there is no, you're not getting a whole lot of polygon edges there, but if we take this to 1, now instead of white edges on our polygons, we're getting black edges on our polygons. So now we have some black outlines, but the colors are still a bit dull. So the black and white outlines and the less bright colors are determined by the same attribute, which is the color I chose for A and B right down here at the bottom of the modifier subpalette. So with cavity detection enabled, with a value of more than 0, ZBrush is rendering the peaks or high points of the object with the color in channel A, and the cavities or low points of the color in channel B. And it's using those two colors to shade the material. So let's go ahead, let's see if we can't demonstrate this. So I'm going to go out of edit mode here. We'll go ahead and just grab a plain 3D, go into edit mode, make it a poly mesh, and we'll just go ahead and subdivide this up a few times. We're going to grab our Damien standard brush, so like B, D, S is Damien standard. And so now as I start sculpting with this, and if I turn to the side here, you're going to see it's actually grabbing this color as we move those face normals. But if we're snapped to the top here, you're going to see as I'm sculpting, and with the Damien standard, it's pushing down. If I hold down Alt, it'll pull up. So as I'm pulling down, if I'm holding down Alt, it's making it black, and as I sculpt it down, it's making it white. Those are the cavity transitions here. If you move the cavity transition slider back to -1, so cavity transition to -1, that'll inverse that effect. And it's not inverting the A and B colors, but it's smoothing or sharpening the transitions or peaks of the cavities black and white. In this case, you're actually inverting the transition between those two colors. So here's another example. So here's A and B are the simple gradient. So A is white, B is black, and the cavity transition is softening that transition between those two. If the cavity detection is not enabled, ZBrush will only take into account A sliders. So if we take cavity detection down to 0, it's only going to be the white slider here. We crank that up to 1. Now it's taking into account B, and you can kind of go between those. And then when you invert the values in the cavity transition here, so from -1 to +1 here, that's just flipping essentially the B and the A colors to another side that is transitioning between. So let's go back to the testing objects here. I'm going to go out of edit mode, control clear my canvas, drag this back out, go into edit mode, and snap this to the front, which we've already done here. Turn the intensity A all the way up to 5. There we go. And the cavity transition to 1. There we go. This is our original matcap, but now we have black outlines. You can play around with the cavity detection. So basically, with that cavity detection all the way up, we're getting black outlines. If we do cavity detection down to 0, it's just going to be black. So as you crank this up, you're getting more and more harsh lines wherever you have polygons. So you can see over here, we're getting harsh lines everywhere we have a lot of polygons. On really simple objects, we're just getting basically an outline of our object there. You can play around with the cavity detection and cavity transition values to tweak the amount of lines and thickness on the outlines. Now that you know the color in the outlines are determined by the B channel, which is this color right down here, the black, you can simply change the B color to something else to get a different color. So if we click this B and we make this red, now we're getting red lines being drawn. If we click B and we can change it to blue, we can change it to like a lighter gray or a darker gray or even a white if we want to. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this black here. Next thing I want to show you is the depth A and depth B. The easy way to understand the practicality of these attributes is to see it as a pinch and a magnify. So let's go ahead and do that a little bit. So there we go. So as we change this depth A right here, watch this matcap here. So as you change that depth A, you're going to see, I'm sorry, don't watch this matcap. Watch the resulting image over here in the brush palette. So as I change this depth A over here, see how that white dot gets smaller? And then as I go back down, it gets back to the original size here. If I do 0, and then if I crank this down to negative, it makes the white really big, and then it goes back down to smaller. So basically what it's doing, if we do 3.5, it's creating this, it's pinching your texture, which is having the result of making this white dot smaller. At 0, it goes back to normal, and then magnify at 0.8. So let's go ahead and do 0.8. There we go. So now it's magnifying, it's bubbling out the center of your texture to make the white a little bit more apparent here. And here you see some examples of 4 is really small, 0.5 is really big, and then anything in between those. You're going to notice when it goes to negative here, it flips the matcap image. So as I go to a negative depth, so see how we have red in the upper left? As I go to negative, green's going to be in the upper left. So it flips the colors and then does your white spot bigger or smaller. And if you want to look at that on the Kepler guy, let's go ahead and load him up. And now we can do our depth A as we get bigger. There's the white getting smaller, and then it's getting bigger, and then it flips as we go negative and then gets bigger and smaller. Cool. So modeling for the comic renderer, deep indentation, sharp lines, contrast shapes. One of the things you'll realize when creating your own materials is that sometimes they look great in one model, but not so great in a different one. Basically, we're going to go to modeling here. Let's go ahead and load up this character here. So I'm going to go into edit mode, hit Control N, and we'll go to simple brush, load tool, resources, Z tools, and we're going to grab this testing hero head. Go ahead and drag this out. Hey everybody, thanks for showing up. If you are just joining us here, we're going over the ZBrushGuides.com/tutorials. Let me go ahead and link you there if you want to follow along or you just want to do this later. And of course, if you want to just learn more stuff or watch previous episodes of this, you can go to that right there, that playlist right there. So we got that head loaded. I'm going to go ahead and drag this out, and by default it has the poly paint turned on. So if you want to make it look like this guy, I'm going to basically go change it from this matte cap to our matte cap gray, and then I'm going to subtool here and turn off this little colorize icon here. You can also go down to your colorize menu, which is under poly paint. There we go, and you can just toggle that colorize button on and off. But I would just click this little paintbrush, and now here we have our hero bust head we're going to be doing some tests on. So the head in the image right is a quick Dynamesh sketch that looks all right in matcap gray, and it seems clean, and the organic shapes have a bit of hard surface around the helmet and the mask here. You can kind of see there's these little pinch lines. It's pretty cool. I took the head and applied one of the matte caps I made, and suddenly it started to look a bit boring. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply this material that we loaded up. So let's see if we have that one. I'm going to go to comma key here, material, and is there anything in here that's close? Not really. Let's see if we can't just grab this one here. Let's double click this one. Comic book pastel. So he's saying we're losing the important lines of expression. There's not too much contrast here. So in this one here, you know, I guess we could actually, no, I mean, what you could do is you could actually just copy this image right here and paste it into this texture right here, and that would drive the look. You know what, just for a little bit of fun, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and hit print screen, which is going to bring up green shot. And it's going to be pretty low res, but I think that's okay just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to take this image right here, and we're going to save as our desktop here. So we'll go to streaming, comic book rendering, and we'll just go ahead and name this test. And let's go ahead and make it a JPEG here. Now if I take this and I go ahead and import a texture test, there we go. So basically this image I just cropped from here is now drawing or just modifying the look of this, so we can kind of just go follow along here. So we're losing some important lines of expression in his face here. And then if you look at this head with the exact same material, it's more detailed and refined. So this one looked a little bit soft. I think this head right here, he already did this. But basically what he's saying is you're going to need more contrast in the shapes here. So if I go from this material back to basic or clay brush, if you have like, you see how sharp these lines are in his face and how heavy and kind of over sculpted these are. If you go down here to your layers palette here, you can add, if you want to keep your original sculpt that's a little bit softer, you can do that, and then you can just add a layer here and then sculpt on it, and then you can just turn this layer off. So if I add a layer, and it's going to start recording here. So if I go in here and I'm like, you know what, I need more contrast in my shapes, I'm going to hit X to go across that symmetry, and then let's see what's going on with this brush. Let's see if we have a morph target assigned. Store morph target. Do we have masking? Yeah, we have masking on here. So if you're trying to sculpt on this guy and he's not letting you do it, just Control drag to clear that mask. And there, now we got a layer on here. So now as we're sculpting, we can really just go through here and start modifying. Let's go to Preferences, Edit, turn off Align Cursor to Surface here, and you're going to see I can go in here even with my Damien Standard brush, and I can start adding. Whoa, Damien Standard. Z intensity is way up there. You know what? Brush, reset all brushes. There we go. Now Damien Standard. Much nicer. So now we can, if you want to go in here and just really kind of pump up the jam between all of these lines here. So when you go back to this comic book renderer, you're going to see as we're doing this, we're adding more contrast in the face to kind of get these shapes to pop a little bit. And you can do this while you're comic style rendering. So if you want to see what it's going to look like, you can go in here and just start sculpting in all these changes and holding on Shift to smooth, and then, you know, clay brush to kind of maybe build up here, so you can kind of see as we're doing this the result we're end up getting. So if your face looks a little bit too plain, then go in there and over sculpt it on a layer. And then if we go back here to matcap gray, where are we at? There we go. Let's go to basic material here. If we're done sculpting this thing, we'll go ahead and turn off recording. And then here we are. Let's go ahead and go to our poly paint here. Go ahead and turn that off. And now we can go ahead and turn off that sculpting that we did. So you're going to see there's our original face and there's our modified face here. And if you don't like those, you can go ahead and just turn those off, and we'll go ahead and just do bake all, and that'll just go back to our normal head here. So let's go back to that comic style renderer here, and we'll go back up here. To upgrade the look of the head, I exaggerated the volumes and indentations a bit more. I also added some alphas and a few lines on the suit. So these, these little details on here on the suit really help kind of sell the shape here. So if you've just got a plain suit right here, see how kind of boring that is? But as soon as you add a little bit of detail in here, it looks like you went in with a pin and kind of colored in a little bit more detail, and it just gives a little more visual representation to the person looking at this that there's actually volume in these shapes and it's not just flat and boring. We exaggerate the low and high points and increase the normal variation in the model. To take a plane, for instance, if we apply the testing matte cap with a black circle and snap the view to look at the top, we see a plane that's totally black. So let's go ahead and do that. So we get rid of that one. Let's go ahead and do matte cap testing black here. Let's go ahead and load that up. And we'll go ahead and grab a plane here. So we were sculpting on this plane here. So let's go ahead and grab this plane here. And I'm just going to take this undo slider and slide it all the way back. So we're just back at a plane here. And then I'll go ahead and subdivide that a few times. So now it's just pure black, right? So if we go over here with our move tool and we kind of move this up. So now we're getting these normals here. If I go back to our basic material, this is basically all we're doing. Let's go ahead and, you know what? Let's mask this, invert that mask, hit W, and let's pull this out here. And then we can go ahead and smooth. Let's do smooth stronger. Kind of soften these transitions a little bit. And then we'll go back to our RGBYK. So there we go. That's all we're creating right here. Now if we subdivide the plane, more faces, more normals, and we pull some faces. So if we drop this resolution down on our object, which is going to be under geometry, and we drop this resolution down, you're going to see this is the resulting mesh. And then as we add more subdivisions, remember the more geometry we have, the smoother those transitions are going to be. And here we are at 4 subdivisions, nice and smooth. The sculpted area have more normals painting in the direction that matches the other point in the image in the matte cap. So if you have a matcap with an image that has a very thin black outline, like this one here, you'll start to get some black lines within your model. And you also need to carve deep in the model until the normals are almost 90 degrees from the view angle. So let's see, do we have one of those? Testing matte here. I know, well, we'll get to it. Cool. So work on your model as you normally would. Once you're happy with it, do your test cap like we said, and then you can create a layer for your cavities. And then let's go ahead and load up the Kepler model and take a look at him. So we got the Kepler model here, and we'll go to matcap gray, or we'll do the basic material. So here's the Kepler model with a gray matte. Oh, let's just follow along. Gray matte cap. I don't know why I keep losing this thing. Did I? You know what? Did I replace my gray matte cap? I might have when I was dropping this stuff in. No biggie. That's fine. This is good enough. You can see the model. Ideally, the volumes and lines are exaggerated to make the character look more consistent across different matte caps here. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get into light caps here. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're about 45 minutes in. Everybody good? Take a little break here. Cool. Yeah, I am watching the chat, but I'm not really paying too much attention to it because we're just going through this. And I'll try and get back to these questions as I go through later broadcasts. I can copy the, I'll save this chat, and then I'll put those on my streaming topics for next time. Cool. For a new guy who just started with ZBrush, it's better to buy the extra brushes to get comfortable using the brushes. Yeah, I agree with Tapori here. So you could start with the basic and kind of see what they do. If you start, I would assume, I don't know for a fact, and it's my opinion, but if you grab a whole ton of brushes and you don't know how they work and you're just kind of using them, but you want to modify them or tweak them, you're kind of limiting yourself as to how versatile you'll be able to be if you don't really understand how the brushes work. So I'd say start with the basics, and that'll give you an understanding of how all the brushes work. And then once you have an idea of what you need, then you can just download any brushes that you want to. And Gumroad's a great resource for that, and there's a ton of places to get brushes, and you can go there. Cool. Okay, so let's get back here. So light caps are pretty cool here. So basically this material here we've already kind of gone over. We can go in here and add any texture we want to a matte cap, and it looks like I killed my matte cap gray here. But any of these matte caps are being driven by this texture here. So if I grab that star texture, now the matte cap is looking like this, and that is actually a pretty cool comic render if I don't say so myself. I like that. Done. Boom. You did it. So we can do this kind of thing, just replacing this texture here. But let's go ahead and load back in that testing matte cap here. There we go. So next, light caps are very powerful, essentially follow the same principles of matte caps. They're both intended to capture light information. So by using light cap, we're going to be creating our own texture that's going to drive our lighting. So the main difference is that with light caps, you can interactively adjust the light and its properties while you create it. With the matte caps, on the other hand, the light information is baked into a single image. Now, you can start with a light cap and bake that to a matte cap when you're done. But like we were saying at the very beginning, if we do have a matte cap here and we change the lighting direction, it's not going to affect it at all because, again, that lighting is baked into this texture. But by using light caps, we're able to have this texture be dynamic and change the lighting on a matte cap. Is that confusing enough for you? It'll make more sense as we get in here. So, although this is a very powerful method to achieve a comic style look, it's not my personal favorite. I chose it to be first in the list discussed because it can give you a very quick and interesting results. So get your creative juices flowing, and you can kind of see, again, how matte caps are playing on your material here. So we'll go back here. Okay, the first thing I want you to do is initialize ZBrush so we can start fresh. So preferences, initialize ZBrush, fully initialize. And then we're going to load the testing hero head Z tool. So load tool, resources, Z tools, testing hero head. And I'll go ahead and drag that out, go into edit mode. And again, if you want to turn that poly paint off, go to your subtool menu, just turn off that little paintbrush there. And then drag it on the canvas, enter edit mode, and dock the light palette on the right or left tray. So the light palette here, we're going to close the material. We're going to grab the light palette and just drag that over here. Also select the Skin Shader 4. So we're going to go into our material palette here, and we're going to go grab our Skin Shader 4, which is down here under the standard materials, Skin Shade 4. There we go. And you should only have one light enabled from the light palette, so go ahead and turn it off. So if you take this light here and we turn that off, that's the look we're going to get. Now you're going to see, we do see this here. So if you go here to the ambient light, turn that down to 0, and that's going to make it a little bit darker, but we can still see the material. And the reason is because the material actually has ambient built into it. So let's go talk a little bit more about that. The reason you can still see the model and some volumes is because the Skin Shader 4 has a bit of ambient built into it. If you open up the material palette and go to the modifier subpalette, you'll see the first attribute is ambient and it's set to 15. So let's go to our material, modifiers, ambient is at 12. So we'll go ahead and drag that down to 0, and now we have a pure black model. And then, the background gradient here, if you go to document, you're going to see there's a range. Just go ahead and change that to 0, and that'll get rid of that background gradient. Before we start creating our first light cap, I want you to go to the material palette and click on any matte cap. So we're going to go into here, and you're going to see, even with all these lights off, if we go in here and just grab on any of these, we'll do green metallic, you're going to see, boom, the lights are back on. The lights aren't back on, the lights are still at 0 here, and it's turned off. So if you click this light, it turns the light off. You could also drag the intensity down to 0, but just clicking the light off is easy enough. So what's going on? We've turned all the lights off, or we're still seeing the matte cap. So this is the practical example of some of the things he's been talking about. Matte caps have the lighting information already baked into the image. So we already knew that. So if we go here to the material here and go down to the bottom, again, this image right here is dictating the lighting. The lighting in ZBrush really is only controlling the shadow direction when we hit BPR. Cool. Now find the light cap subpalette in the light palette. So here's the light palette. There's the light cap subpalette in here. We don't want to alter any matte cap, but to start fresh, so we're going to select the Skin Shader 4 material again. And the skin shade is a ZBrush shader, not a matte cap. Click on the new light button in the light cap palette, and you should see something like this. So we'll go back to our materials here, and we're going to go ahead and grab our Skin Shader 4 that we were playing with. And again, this thing, ambient's completely turned down. And now we're just playing with our light caps. Click on the new light button from the light cap subpalette. You should see something like this. So if we go to new light, we just added a basic light to our light palette here. So we just created a light that's letting us see the volume of our objects. So let's do a quick overview of some of the attributes. The strength is the higher the value, the more light that's diffused from the object. So we take the strength from 0.25 and crank it up. There's more light. If we crank it down, there's less light. Pretty self-explanatory. The shadow slider determines the opacity of the shadows cast by the selected light in the light cap. I will turn this attribute to 0 in most cases when creating a comic light cap. So if you take this shadow down and crank that down, it will get rid of any shadows that are cast. The aperture and fall off, these two attributes will be the most important ones to create the look we want. So the aperture defines how the light is spread over the model. Think about it as a super concentrated laser beam when you have lower values, or a huge diffuse light box when you're in the higher values. So if you do this aperture here at 90 and we lower it down, now we're getting lower values, and now if we crank this up, it's getting very much just kind of ambient renders. So here's at 180, it does look like an ambient occlusion, and then as we crank this down, it gets less and less until it kind of, so let's go ahead and put this back at 80 here. The fall off determines the distance covered by the light in the model. For our purposes, the easiest way to think about this is a sharpen blur slider for the area covered by the light. So a fall off at 2, and then there's the sharpen and blur fall off there. Cool. With all this in mind, set the strength value to something like 1.3. So we're going to kind of blow those lights out a little bit. And the aperture slider to 60. You should get something like this, and I'm assuming that the fall off slider is probably set back to the default of 2. Looks about right. Now go ahead and change the fall off slider to 0. So fall off down to 0, and what do we get? We get a comic style render-ish. Pretty neat. Looks like a little ink drawing that you can just change on the fly here. So from the light cap editor preview image, click and drag the little red dot that appears in the middle. This is the light. So our light cap here, so when we hit new light, we got a new light index here. So if I go and click in here, there's a little red dot. So this is actually going to change the direction of that light that we created with all these light properties here. Pretty neat. So if you want to go to high noon, you can make it this way. You can go down below, get a little bit of dramatic Frankenstein rendering here, like so. Note, if you see a bit of gray between the black and white areas in your model, this is because we haven't turned off the specular slider in the material modifier to the skin shader 4. If you want pure black and white, you can just set that specular slider to 0. So if you go back here to the material, and we have the specular, if we turn that down to 0, if you crank that up, it looks like we're okay. From this point on, you have two options. So number one, we can keep playing around with the lighting and add some poly paint to your model so you can start getting some colors in your comic book illustration. So if we turn this poly paint colorize back on, you're going to see that with the poly paint, we're getting the rendering, the light cap doing this kind of effect, and then the poly paint doing the heavy lifting on the color side. Number two, you can use the light source as a color of the model and then create a matte cap from the light cap. So instead of having poly paint drive the color, you can also add color to the lighting. Quick example for option number one, position the light in the angle I liked and then assign some flat colors to the hero head, which we already have. Option number two is a bit more juicy, so let's see what we can do. So we're going to keep the poly paint on so you can see how the lights affect the color. In the light cap subpalette, there's a color picker next to the blending mode of the light. So in the light cap subpalette, here's the color picker. This allows you to pick a color for your light source. So I'm going to start by creating a bit of shading. I want to have a strong, sharp shadows, but let's see some details and volumes a bit more. Let's create the base for this material, leave the color in white, and tweak the strength, aperture, and fall off. Set the value to 1 for the strength, and then 120 for the aperture, and then 1.2 for the fall off. There we go. So this is, instead of doing a really stark, contrasty render, this one's a little bit more of a soft render here. Now we're going to create a new light. So this is our base, and it looks like we're just going to position this. Let me see if I can just kind of match this. Looks like the light's somewhere in this range, just vaguely in the middle. Now create a new light from the new light button. You'll be able to cycle between the lights using the light index. When you have multiple lights, make sure you select the one you want to change because the attributes are unique to each light. So basically, as soon as we hit new light, we get a new index, and as we toggle this back and forth, here's light index 1, here's light index 2. And they have their own settings. So we go back to light index 1, there's the aperture of 120. Light index 2 gets the default, which is aperture of 90. Cool. Everybody doing good? Okay, moving right along. So the new light will be the specular or highlight, but very subtle. So with these light caps, you do have the diffuse option and a specular option. So, and those drive the different values of this. So we're going to see the new light will be the specular or highlight, but very subtle. I'm going to keep it on the diffuse, but we'll see if we need to switch back to specular. So with the strength at 0.15 and the aperture at 60 and the fall off at 5, I'm going to crank that way up. So light 1, and if we take this light here and we turn that down to 0, you're going to see how we're not getting any specular. As soon as we change this up to 0.15, we're getting a little bit of specular. Let me go ahead and zoom in so you guys can see this a little bit better. So again, strength down at 0, specular gone, 0.15. Here's a little bit of a specular back, and we're using these fall off values and the aperture values to kind of drive how that specular plays across the surface. Next step is to get some shadows, but instead of enabling them, we're going to use the light itself as a shadow. So we're going to use a black light simply by changing the color to black and then the blending mode to multiply. So are we adding a new light index here? It looks like we are. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and create a new light. And with this new light index 3, you're going to see there's the new index 3 slider over here. So if I position this down in the lower left-hand corner and we change this color to black, that's going to create a shadow light here. So let's see. And blending mode to multiply. So if we go over here to the blend mode, we're going to set this to multiply. And now we're blending this black light. So see, as I drag this light that's black, now we're getting shadows by creating a light and making the color black and sending the multiply, now it's a shadow. Cool. Starting to see the value of this method, but let's wrap it up and finish by adding a few more lights. The next one is another black light here. Okay. Next one is another black light that I positioned at the bottom slightly to the right. So let's go ahead and change, you know what, this black light here that we just made, this index 3, I'm going to go ahead and do, let's see if we can do these settings here. Fall off, I'm going to crank, strength, aperture, fall off. We'll crank that up a bit. Let's see, create a new light. Specular, strength 0.15, aperture 60, fall off at 5. Next step is get some shadows. Okay, so black light, color, blending, multiply. Okay, so let's see, he's got the strength at 0.25. And the shadows at 100, aperture at 84. The fall off at 0. There we go. So the fall off at 0 is going to give you that nice, crispy kind of shadow look here. Exposure 1, gamma 1. Okay. Okay. And back up here. And oh yeah, we need to add another one. So we'll create new light. And let's go ahead and keep these same settings here. So a light index of 4, we're going to drag this down to the lower right. We're going to do an aperture of 90 is probably fine. Fall off at 0, we're going to change the color to black here. And then we're going to go to the blend mode of multiply. And then as we move this thing around, now we're getting that black shading on both sides of the face there. Okay, finally we just need to add a couple more highlights to make the render more interesting. Create another light, the 5th one, and change the color to something like bright yellow. So we're going to go ahead and change new light. We're going to make the color bright yellow. And if you click and drag off your document, you can actually go in here and you can color pick. But we can go ahead and just change this to just a bright yellow. There we go. Change the color like bright yellow. Set the blending mode to replace normal. So in the blend mode here, it's under add by default. We're going to hit replace normal. And then crank the strength up to 20. Play with the aperture and fall off to get a sharp highlight and position the light to the right. So here's the light. I'm going to move this on over to the right. And so now you can see, you know, it's got a soft fall off here. So we change the aperture here. We can kind of make that less or more, and the fall off here. So let's go ahead and fall off at 0, and then positioning the light, you're going to get more and more highlight along the edges here. There we go. So you can kind of get that kind of look. Create one more final light that we'll use as a secondary light source. This time I set the color to blue and moved it to the left. So we're going to create one more light here, new light. Set the color to blue and moved it to the left. So here's the new light. Oops, that's light index 2. So light index 6 here. There it is. Move that to the left. Change the exposure to 6. So instead of changing the strength, we're going to change the exposure. It's basically going to multiply the strength by the exposure number. Exposure multiplies the value of the strength slider, just so you know. So we're going to change the exposure to 6. Cool. And then, of course, we can play with the aperture and fall off. So we change that fall off to 0. That'll give us a nice sharp look here. Oops, we're changing. There we go. So just a little bit of blue on the side here. Nice. Cool. That's in a nutshell the idea of creating light caps. You can also click on the create texture button to bake all of these this light work we've been doing. If we do create texture, that's going to bake that into a texture image that you can then go in here with that selected and hit export and just bring this in as an image that you would use for your materials here. So if we hit again the comma key, where we copy these materials in. These materials are being driven by basically that image that was created with Lightcap or in Photoshop, which we'll get to in a bit. Alternative, you want to have the ability to further tweak your lights later on. So if you bake this to an image, you can no longer tweak this image unless you go to an image manipulator. I'll go and turn that texture off. If you want to maintain this functionality and be able to go like, you know what, I was working on this and I don't like all that much blue, so I'm going to take this blue and kind of shift it over with the light index here and just maybe get a little bit less. If you want that functionality, what you're going to need to do is save the light cap, so all your light settings will be saved. So under here, there's a light cap, go to save, and then you can go ahead and save this light cap out as a ZLD. There's an extra tip I want to share before you're moving on. You don't need to have poly paint on your model. You can actually turn the poly paint off and use the lights to create your shading. For example, see this orange and then the blue shadow and the highlights and stuff. Yeah, if you turn this poly paint off, this is the look you're getting. So if we go back here to our light index of 1, our base color here, and we change this to like orange or whatever, now we're using the colors of the lights to dictate the color of our object. So don't even need to have poly paint. Obviously, you can enhance the render by mixing this method with some of the techniques we're going to discuss in the next section, but I think it'll give you a good starting point for your comic style illustrations. This is Kepler, so let's go ahead and load up Kepler here. There we go, hit F to frame. This is Kepler with the light cap image saved in a matte cap, and I tweaked the bit of the modifiers I mentioned before, like cavity detection and cavity transition. So let's go back to our material here. And cavity detection and cavity transition are in the matte cap stuff. So if we grab, do we have any matte caps in here? Let's go ahead and grab, actually we'll replace Skin Shader 4. Let's go to Sketch Gummy. And then we'll load up any one of these here. This one's fine. Hit the comic key to get rid of that. And like I mentioned before, the cavity detection and cavity transition here. So here's the cavity detection, cavity transition that we talked about before. And now we're kind of changing, the contrast between the peaks of your geometry and the cavities of your geometry. And there's the cavity color. So, and the detection is kind of changing the contrast between the two. So you can really dial in a really cool look very quickly and really kind of fine tune how contrasty or how much cavity detection you want, and that transition and detection. The detection I really like to kind of just make it a little bit more subtle, a little bit more, softer, like they went in and, airbrush this a little bit more, or used an airbrush brush in Photoshop or whatever. Take a little break. How we doing, everybody? Thanks for showing up. Again, if you want to follow along, go to zbrushguides.com/tutorials, and that'll go ahead and launch. You can go and follow along if you want to. Cool, cool. Awesome. Beautiful. So I'll keep moving along here. So ZBrush matte caps for comic style render. The next technique I want to share with you adopts the same idea behind the creation of the light cap, but this time we're going to be using a matte cap image based on an illustration. So we'll be editing the image of the matte cap directly as we build it up. This approach is great if you want to create a material based on the style of your favorite comic. So I'll start by loading the Kepler character. So we already have that loaded. And the process should be exactly the same. Select a matte cap that you don't use much because we're going to be replacing it here. So we'll do, it doesn't really matter, matte cap skeleton. And the image used by the matte cap will be overwritten until you restart ZBrush again. So he chose chalk. You know what? Let's go ahead and do matte cap red wax. First thing we should do is dock the material palette over to the left, which we've already done. So again, the docking divider is over here, and the material, just grab this little white button and drag it over here. Open up the modifier subpalette and reset all of the attributes. So here's the modifiers here. Reset the cavity and transition. You know what? Let's see. Cavity and transition to 0 and the A intensity to 1. So cavity transition to 0. A intensity to 1, B intensity. All of these things look nice and zeroed out as well, so I think we're in good shape here. So find your reference image, try to pick something that has all the shades and colors you would like to bake in your new matte cap. I loaded the illustration of Kepler and added to the spotlight. So this image right here, I'm going to go ahead and do Control++++. And we're going to do like we did before. I'm going to go ahead and take this image right here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit print screen, and we'll go ahead and just grab this image here, and we're going to go save as, comic rendering, So say you're going into a comic book and you want to copy the style of the comic book coloring into your ZBrush material. So we're going to do this comic color JPEG, and then we're going to load this in the spotlight here. So we're going to control minus, 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 minus. There we go. So go to the texture palette, select your image, and add a spotlight. So we're going to go up here to the texture palette. We're going to go to import, and again, where we saved that JPEG here, here's the comic color JPEG we saved. Now we have this texture imported but not selected. So select it, hit this little plus, add to spotlight, and now this image right here is added to spotlight. You can turn spotlight on and off with Shift Z and Z, and enter the spotlight edit mode by pressing Z. Move the image to the side and your 3D model to the opposite side. So with this image here, you can click and move this thing around. We're going to scale this down a bit. You're also going to see the pure black in our image is kind of making a little bit of transparency. If you want to kill that a little bit, go to the intensity, click that, and then just change that intensity up a little bit, and or down a little bit actually, and that'll make your blacks not pure black, and we won't get that transparency issue. So now we're going to click the scale and just scale this down, and the opacity here, we can go ahead and crank this all the way up so you can make sure you see it all nicely. And we'll just move this up here to the corner, because we're going to be sampling the color on this image here. So let's kind of move this here, and then hit Z to go out of spotlight mode. If you want to turn spotlight off, you can do Shift Z, and Shift Z toggles it on and off, and then Z toggles on and off this manipulator mode here. So we'll just kind of move this here, and we'll move our guy over to here. So again, you have an image of a comic book that you like, go ahead and bring it into the spotlight, and then we're going to recreate that look in here. What's important thing to understand is that the image used by any matcap is a capture of the environment, so the lighting and reflections. And so what you're going to need to do if you want to create a good matcap, and remember all these matcaps we have here are being driven by, under modifiers here, if we hover over this image here, it's being driven by spheres. So if you want to get a good representation of how your object is going to look, you know, take the dome part. Like if you're doing Batman, take Batman's dome head and then just sample from his forehead and stuff, and that'll get you a better representation of the overall shading. Okay, so let's introduce the matcap brush. Let me go ahead and hide this here. It's bugging me up on the left. Go to the tool palette and open up the tool menu and select the matcap brush from the 2.5D brushes section. Now this is interesting. I had no idea this thing even existed when I first went through this. So go to the tool palette. So if we go here to the tool palette here, I'm going to hit switch, and there is a matcap button right there. ZBrush will tell you your current tool is in edit mode and ask if you want to exit edit mode and switch tools. We need to click on switch because we're going to be dropping. This model is no longer editable. See how we don't have edit mode turned on? So we are completely just dropped to the document. It still has 2.5D information, so it'll still render correctly, but we're in 2.5D mode. So now we're ready to start building our comic book matcap. Begin by finding the color or tone that is more prominent or that covers the biggest area. In this case, the light blue is a pretty safe choice. So this area right here is the most prominent one. So this is going to be like our base of our color, and then we're going to be layering on top of that to create our specular and then our shadows. Okay, so click, once you've identified the primary color, click on it over your reference images. You'll see three things happen simultaneously. So we're in ZBrush here, and we have our matcap selected. We're going to click on that blue right there, and you're going to see it's going to color our object with blue. And there you can see it's also updating this image here. And there is also a little dot here with a little arrow on it. The image used by the matcap chalk has been overwritten by the color you choose, and the 3D model is not editable because we dropped it to the canvas. It's filled with a blue color. Pretty cool. Because we've only chosen one color, there shouldn't be any shading, but a flat color. If you see shadows, it's because the preview shadows are on. If I personally don't mind having them on, but if you want, you can turn them off in the render palette, preview shadows, object shadow slider. So the render palette here, let's go ahead and turn off BPR filters. Preview shadows, object shadow, is that what it was? Render palette, preview shadows, object shadow slider is at 0.3. So if you want to turn that off, just change that down to 0, and then it'll be flat color. Not sure if he keeps this on or not. We'll go ahead and keep that at 0.3. After choosing the first color, I realized there should actually be a slightly darker blue that should be the primary, and the light blue is just a really big soft specular. So really what he's saying is this color right here should be your base, and this is just part of a soft specular fall off. To remove a marker, the point you created when you click from the matcap is easy. Hover over the area where you click to pick your color, and you'll see a little red square. You can now hold down Alt and click to delete it. So here's the little marker here. Hold down Alt and tap, and that'll go ahead and delete that marker. So I click on the new color here. So that's what he's saying should be the base, is this base color here. And then click again on the lighter blue, but this time I'm going to give the highlight some direction. So there's our base, and then we're going to click on the lighter blue and give it the direction. To do that, you're going to click and hold and then drag in the direction you want. You're going to see the preview sphere updating this as you drag the red arrow. So if you click on this lighter one and then drag, you're going to see that's going to be the direction of the light. So if we go over here, so see how the direction's kind of coming in this way? We'll kind of put this over here to the right. Once you let go of the click, you should start to see some shading on the model. So this is a great way to create all sorts of matte caps, but we want to get the comic book look and feel, and the transition between colors is very smooth right now. Next step to learn is how to get a sharper transition between the colors, moving from diffuse light to a more specular point. Click again on your image reference to select another color. While clicking, drag the mouse to set the direction of the light. And then before you release, hold down Control. And then when you hold down Control, you're going to see it's going to blur and sharpen. So in order to make a sharp area like this bright one right here, we're going to need to kind of sharpen the contrast between there. So basically what he's doing is, see how he has all these little points, these little matcap points in here, and they're all just kind of painted just like little blobs on here. So he's creating a bunch of different samples in here and then holding down Control to make those little blobs happen. Okay. So we're going to need to get it to look something like this. So let's go ahead and start. So basically, we're going to click to set the direction. So we're going to go ahead and do click on our object, and this is going to be the dark purple, and then we're going to hold down Control and make this, see how we can kind of drag left and right. We can kind of make this a little bit sharper here, and then now you can go through here and kind of set that direction here. So if you want to, again, sample in that dark color, hold down Control, and then drag right, and then click again and kind of set this here. We're just kind of painting the bottom edge of this with this kind of mid purple here. So let's go ahead and click in this dark area here, and we're going to move this to that direction, and then you can always click and then hold down Control and then kind of sharpen that up again. Whoops. Let's hold down Alt, get rid of that one. There we go. So there's kind of that dark splotch here. If you want a black splotch, let's go ahead and click on the black here and kind of position this along the side as well, and then hold down Control and make that, kind of put this black splotch over here. So again, just kind of going around and creating it until you get something like that. So let's go ahead and just continue. Let's go ahead and do this dark one here. Hold down Control, and we'll just kind of put these blobs there. And then we'll go ahead and do one more here. And I'm not going to do it perfectly, but you guys, you know, feel free to kind of go in here. Okay, so now we have all these kind of dark areas painted. Let's go ahead and get these light areas painted. Let's go ahead and do one of this light one here, and then hold down Control. And we'll go ahead and start brightening up this middle area here. Click and drag. And then this really bright one here, we'll go ahead and click in here, hold down Control to really tighten that up, and then set that direction here. There we go. Now, there is dark on both sides of the face here, so we're going to need to put some dark over here. So I'm going to click over here, hold down Control. Actually, we'll set the light angle, and then hold down Control, and that'll kind of position that. And if you want to reset that, just go over that little blob here. And then if we want black on the right side too, which we do have on here, we'll just click here, set that angle, go ahead and make that a little darker, and then, whoops, Alt-click that one if you make a mistake. And then go ahead and put some black here on the side. If you want to do multiple blacks, black colors obviously, again, Control drag, and then just go in there and set those lines there. Cool, something like that. And again, do this as much as you want to kind of match that as closely as you can. Doesn't look quite right yet, especially in the very smooth areas like the head and chest of the character, but don't give up. This is a great way to achieve some very interesting shading. Once you have used all the markers you need to describe the lighting of your reference images, you can move on to refining the matte cap. So that's what we're going to be doing now. First, check the image we have created in the matte cap texture. Just hover over it and you kind of see. Come on, there we go. And again, it's not perfect, but I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Just to hover the image, you might decide you need some extra markers. This is how his looks. The way the colors are mixed in the actual model is not too bad. This is why a good practice to create your matte caps based on the model you intended to use the materials with. So to refine this matte cap, we're going to open up the Matte Cap Maker subpalette, the last one in the material palette. So with the material palette docked, which we did earlier, we're going to go all the way down to this Matte Cap Maker at the very bottom. You have a series of attributes. The first one we're going to change its gloss. So this slider can help you sharpen the transitions between the markers or blur them a lot. So with gloss at 0.1, it's going to have a very, very soft transition. And then as you crank this up, it's going to have a more and more harsh transition between your markers that you've set. Cool. Then you have the refine attribute, which I rarely use. And when I say I mean Pablo Munoz Gomez, the guy who made this. You're going to see his name all over this thing. And again, if you want to follow along, just look in the lower right-hand corner, ZBrushGuides.com/tutorials. It's a ZBrush comic style rendering. This kind of behaves as a burn saturate color slider. So we have the refine attribute here. So it's at 25 now. As we crank this up, it kind of does a little color burn. And as we crank this down, it kind of doesn't. So we'll just go ahead and leave that at 25. Next, you have intensity, saturation, and contrast. So sounds pretty self-explanatory. Since these attributes modify the matte cap image, you could think of them as simply levels, hue, saturation, and brightness contrast in Photoshop. So if you want to crank up the intensity of your image, it'll do that. The contrast of your image, and then of course the saturation of your image. Looks like contrast kind of killed it there. Then there is backlight, but I haven't found it to be that useful. I believe this is a slider to exaggerate the Fresnel effect of your image. All right, let's see, contrast at 0, 1. There we go. So contrast back to 1 here. Backlight. So here's the backlight at 0. And then as you crank this up, you're grabbing a little bit more of the Fresnel information on the side there. Specular slider is quite interesting. At first, if you're just playing around with the slider, it might seem that it does the same as a gloss slider, but it's a different effect. It does blurs and sharpens the transition between the markers, but it also reduces the radius of each marker sample. So specular here, as we crank this up, it's taking all of the radiuses of the sample here. So if we hover over this, you're going to see how it's affecting the colors that we have. If we change the specular back down to 0, you're going to see there's our original kind of nice soft transition between them. As you crank this up, it's kind of bleeding out and making the transitions between them pretty harsh. Pretty cool. For instance, the following image has a gloss slider set at 0.3, which is quite diffuse, so nice and soft. The other one has a gloss value of 5. We can start to see clear definition of between the colors. Now look what happens when we take the first image with the gloss at 0.3. And oh, the specular should have been at 0. So here's gloss at 0.3. Here's the gloss with it cranked up. So now if we take the gloss at 0.3 and change the specular, we're kind of getting something similar. Increase the specular to 500. There we go. So keep the specular at 500 and slowly increase the gloss value. You can see the ZBrush is reducing the diameter of each sample marker. So there we go. It's kind of shrinking down those marker colors there. And then you've got the final settings. Finally, you can play the matte cap fall off curve. So let's go ahead and crank that gloss up just a tiny bit, do 0.3 here. And then we have the matte cap fall off curve. You can open this up and you can create different little curve effects here to kind of dial in that exact look you want. Now, basic curve functionality, if you click, let's go ahead and reset this. So this is the default here. If you click in here, or if you click any one of these orange ones here, you can kind of lower and raise these to kind of get the effect of these end points here. And if you click anywhere in the middle, you'll create a new point. If you click and drag, you'll set that new point to a different location. If you change this fall off slider, so we crank it all the way up here, you can change this fall off, and that will sometimes harshen the transition between these points. If you want to make that a very sharp transition, just click and drag off and then drag back on. Don't click and release. If you click and release, that deletes. So you can create a new one, click click and drag off and release, that'll delete it. If you have a new one here, see that soft transition, if we click and drag and then drag back in without releasing, that'll create a very harsh transition there. So you can kind of go through here and kind of set up different curves here. You're going to see he's got this here. You can do kind of a stepped here. So if you kind of go up here and we'll kind of go here and we'll take this one off and on, and that'll create kind of a sharp stepped transition here. There we go. Kind of getting a cool look like so. Neat. If we reset this one, we can kind of do this curve. We can invert this just by dragging this one up and then this one down, and that'll kind of give us an invert here, and now we can kind of play with an inverted look. So very dark shaded here. Cool. Once you're happy with your matte cap, after you're doing all this stuff, go to the top of the material palette and click save, and that'll save your matte cap out. So when we have save the matte cap, so we go to ZBrush 4R8, Z materials, comic style rendering, which we copied in here. I'm just going to call this one test save. This is our material here. So now if we hit the comma key, you're going to see there's a test save Z material in there. Cool. So that'll just allow you to kind of bring that back in. Of course, you can add stepping and noise to all this stuff as we go. Once you're happy, go ahead and save it. And tip, if you want to have your brand new matte cap available every time you start ZBrush, you'll need to save it in the matte cap startup folder. So by default, we have our startup materials that always show up every time we load up ZBrush. If you want it in the light box here, that's where we saved it in the, go ahead and dial that in here. So program files, Pixelogic ZBrush 4R8, and then we got the Z startup. This is where if you wanted to start, you want the material to show up every time you start up ZBrush, drop them in here. And then if you want them to show up whenever you go into the light box, that's where you're going to go into the Z materials folder. And then you can make all the new folders in here you want to if you want to organize. And then you can just drop them in here. And then again, every time you hit the comma key, they'll be in your material here. Cool. Made some good progress, but the next couple of methods are really going to take the comic style to the next level. One last thing, if you want to delete all the markers you've created, go to marker in the top menu and click delete markers. So go to marker here and we can just hit delete all. That'll delete all the markers that you've ever seen. Now we're going to use Photoshop for comic style rendering. So why would we use Photoshop? We're still using ZBrush to render the materials, but sometimes it's easier just to manipulate the images in Photoshop rather than in ZBrush. It doesn't have to be Photoshop. Most image editing software will work. You could have started this guide describing this method because it allows you to ditch out a number of large options, but test various combinations of colors. It was just to make the models look very cool, but if you thought it was necessary to understand the light cap and matte cap creation process beforehand, because now what we're going to be doing is kind of working blind. Now you can go into Photoshop, save the image, import in the ZBrush, apply it to your object, and then you can kind of just go from there. But it's not quite as on the fly or editable as the matte cap, light cap stuff we were doing. So what you can do is start out in light cap and just kind of dial it in, and then take your image that you created from your matte cap here, and then take this into Photoshop and kind of match it and play around with it and refine it from there if you'd like. Okay, so let's begin by opening the Photoshop matte cap template. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go to Preferences, Initialize ZBrush. And now I'm going to get a drink of water because I've been doing a lot of talking. Question. Recently finished Doom 2016. Saw your name in the credits. Character art, Michael Powell. Which characters do you work on? That's a good question. None? I really don't remember. I worked on a lot of projects, and that one kind of went for a while. I honestly don't remember. And that's the other problem too, is when you're doing working on projects that are basically under NDA, I don't even bother, like, you know, normally when you work on a game and you're just like, oh, I created all this stuff, I'm gonna put it on my portfolio and it's gonna be really cool. I don't even bother with that, just because NDAs and doing third-party co-development type stuff, it's just not worth it. So that's why I usually end up just work on the project, and then it goes, and then I forget I forget about it. Since we're in the materials area, what does the material blend radius work in 4R8? Material blend radius, I would assume. Let me see. So we've restarted here. I'm going to hit Shift Z to go ahead and turn off our spotlight there. Where is the material blend radius? Obviously, I don't use materials that often. That's why it was so interesting for me to go through here, because I don't really deal with materials. I don't do comic style rendering in ZBrush at all. So I have no idea where the material blend radius even is. So we're going to start, let's see, creating the image for the matcap without the interactive feedback, the previous method. Okay, so let's begin by opening the Photoshop matcap template PSD that I prepared for you. So we're going to go into Photoshop here. And I'm using Photoshop CC. This is another thing. So early this morning, I got up and I was having problems with the laptop. So if we take this Photoshop here, let's go ahead and dock this to the left. So basically, yeah, so when we open up the Photoshop matcap template PSD, we're going to go into resources here. And we got the Photoshop templates. Here's the Photoshop matcap template. This is a smart object. You're going to see over here, double click to edit. You can double click this, and this goes to this one. And then you can edit this thing all you want, and then go back. You can save it, and then go back, and then it'll update the original file. However, for some reason, when I was in here and I was in the shapes section right here, so you can have your shape selection here. You can drag out these different shapes to create these. It was being really slow. So what I basically had to do, just in case this happens to anybody else for some reason, you're going to go to see users, input which app data roaming, Photoshop CC 2017. There's Photoshop CC 2017 settings, and I just drag this out, and basically it just resets all of your settings. So it's kind of a pain, but it did resolve that issue, because basically I was clicking on these and it was taking like 10 seconds to allow me to edit these shapes here. So we're going to start here. We see a couple of layers here and a background and the smart objects in the image. So if you double click on the smart object, it opens in a separate document that you can edit, and then you can hit Control S to save. When you're saved, you can go back to the template, and then you can save that as a JPEG to import into ZBrush. Within the smart object, you see a few layers of objects that make up the material. And there's just these layers over here created. So we're going to be making this pretty soon here. With this approach, we're going to create the same image we created before with the matcap creator, but this time we're going to have much more control over the transition between the colors. Cool. To start, delete or turn off the layers in the smart objects, leaving just the background and the mask. So here's the mask at the top, and then here's the background, BG. We're going to take all these and just drag them to the trash. Just shift select all those and drag them to the trash. Found out the easiest way to build up an image for a matcap is to work from the back to the front. So if your base, and then start adding in your colors around that. So first we'll create the color is going to be the dark outline. Create a new layer, and let's create a circle using the ellipse tool, which is U. And then this one here, you can just click. If you have rectangle selected, just click and hold, and then go to the ellipse tool here. Hold Shift to create a perfect circle, and then if you hold down Alt, that'll actually drag out from the center of where you clicked, and you can use spacebar to move this around. After you create it, you can also hit Control T and transform it into place. So we can just kind of move this thing around if we want to, or we can just go ahead and drop it. So we'll go ahead and just drop this thing here. And then if we want to change the color, I'm going to go to this fill, and we're just going to turn that to black. Okay. And then if we do, we can do Control T, that goes into transform mode, and now we can kind of just dial this into place. We're going to just kind of move this here. And I'm holding down Shift as well to kind of just move the stuff around, and we can kind of put that right in there. Hit Enter to go out of transform mode, and there's our shape. Fill this with black, or use your reference image to color pick the area where the color that you want. The next layer will be the next color inward. So this is basically going to be our outline. We're going to do a dark purple. I like to open up a reference image as a separate document so I can keep it side by side. So we can go ahead. Let me just put that reference image in here. Streaming, comic rendering. Here's our sample color here. And actually, I mean, we can use this, but we can also just kind of have this floating around, or we can go to File, Open, and we'll go to Streaming here. Comic style rendering. We'll just have this open over here, maybe. All right, good enough. Next layer will be the next color inward, so go ahead and activate this document here. Using the same process before, create a smaller purple cylinder to end up something like this. Tip, if you created a shape using the ellipse tool, you can simply press Control J to duplicate it, and then Control T to scale it and reposition, then just change the color. So we can take this ellipse, I'm just going to drag it to this new one to make a copy, and then I'm going to do Control T And again, if I hold down Shift, that'll constrain it. If I hold down Alt, that'll constrain it from the middle. And we can just kind of pull this in, hit Enter. And then with this shape selected, we can go to Fill, and then we can just sample from here. Let's go ahead and do this sample color here, and we'll just sample the dark purple along the side here. There we go. Perfect. And now when we go to Fill, we can just sample that color there. Okay, so there's the dark purple here. Save the smart object, close it, and save the document as a JPEG to the desktop for quick access. Switch back to ZBrush and import the JPEG. So when we're done working on this, hit Control-S to save it, and then we can go ahead and close this. And this will go ahead and open up this one here. We're going to do Control-Shift-S, and then we can save this as a JPEG, which we're just going to throw into our comic rendering base here, and we'll call this test purple. And we'll just go ahead and make that quality of 12. Why not? Go back into ZBrush. We're going to go to Texture, Import, and we're going to go back to our test purple there. So we've got it imported here, and we're JPEG into a texture or the matcap, and then from the modifier subpalette, click the textures import here. You could also, instead of going into textures import, you could also go down here and do import, and that'll import the purple, and then you just select it. So now we've replaced this. Let's go ahead and do our load tool since we've initialized here. Kepler bust. There we go. So now we have our object here. Not super exciting yet, but we can see the outer outline in here. And let's go ahead and go back to our document and change that range back down to 0 so we can kind of see a little bit better. The outer black ring is giving us some outlines in the model, even when the rest is a flat purple color. At this point, you can decide if you want a thicker or thinner outlines, and change the size of the inner purple circle to make the outline bigger or smaller. And this is, going in there. I wonder if also we can do, what was the one? It was intensity A. No. It was the original. The one where it kind of shrinks the sides in. Doesn't look like it's doing much there, but you can go in there and make it thicker in Photoshop, and that'll give you a more a broader outline. I'll leave it as it is because thickness outline color will be tweaked within ZBrush, and we'll explore the attribute of the matcap. Cool. So switch back to Photoshop, create the next layer with the blue color. Looking at the reference, if we concentrate in the rounded areas like the head, the purple color gets thinner towards the top and the bottom. So for the next color, I scale it in on proportionally to mimic that effect. So we'll hop back over into Photoshop here. And then we'll go ahead, double click this to go back into editing it. And then we're going to go ahead and duplicate this. I don't have any of my hotkeys. And then we'll go ahead and Control T, and we'll go ahead and move this in here. And for the fill, we can go ahead and just do the little bit of a lighter color here. There's got to be a better way to sample this stuff. There we go. Okay, so we've kind of scaled this in. Again, if you do Control T, that's just doing an overall transform, and you can hold down Shift, and that'll keep it proportional, and then Alt to go from the center here. So you want to do perfectly center, hold down Alt. You can kind of scale that in. Although I picked the wrong color here, so we want this purple here. So let's go ahead and sample that slightly darker purple there, and then when we go back into our fill layer here, we'll just grab that last one. Alrighty. Next layer could be for the lighter blue color, the lighter purple, but looks like the lighter blue is sitting on top of the lighter purple, and since we're working from back to front, the lighter purple seems like the best option. Since I'm using shapes, I can use the direct selection tool to manipulate the points in the ellipse after the fact. So we'll go ahead and, so we got this lighter color here. Let's go ahead and modify this a little bit. We're going to make this a little bit wider. And again, you're just kind of matching the shape here. So we'll kind of do this here. And now if we duplicate this one, and now we want to do the slightly darker one here. So let's go ahead and we're going to, first of all, we're going to make it smaller overall. So we're going to just overall make it a little bit smaller, and then we're going to change the shape a little bit. So here it is smaller, and then we go into that fill, and we've already sampled the darker one. No, we haven't. So we'll go ahead and go to the eyedropper tool, sample that darker one here, hit U, and then go back to fill, and just grab that darker one here. So there's our darker one. And now at this one, if we go in here to these manipulator, we can do the direct selection tool. So just click and hold, it's A, and do direct selection, and then you can go through here and you can start picking any one of these points individually. Live shape into a regular path. There we go. That's fine. And now you can do, you can change these transitions here. So these little, you can click these dots, and that'll move one dot around. So if you want to kind of change that shape, and then you can grab these little handles here, and you can kind of Bezier curve these things around to kind of manipulate these shapes as well. Hit enter to go ahead and lock that in. Now let's add the lighter blue on the top. So it looks like the dark's here. So this dark, it just kind of creates the shape here, which is what we're creating. Then we're going to put a big fat lighter color right on top of this thing here. So we're going to take this ellipse copy here, drag it on top, and then we're just going to scale this overall down, holding down shift, and we'll just kind of move this into place. And because this is on top of everything, that's why I re-layered it here. And then we'll go back into our eyedropper tool. We'll do this lighter color here, and then we'll hit U, and then for this fill, we'll grab that lighter color there. Cool. Looks like another horizontally squashed circle. You can also see a little bit of the light purple on the left as well. So yeah, it looks about right. Finally, we add the little bit, a teeny bit of green that does a subtle highlight towards the top. Let's go ahead and just duplicate this one. And we'll do an overall Control T transition, and we'll just make a little highlight right up here. You're going to see it looks like the highlight kind of gets squashed as it approaches these, so we'll go ahead and manipulate and edit this a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and sample that one, and then we'll go ahead and make that the lighter green here. And then again, we'll go back in here to the individual manipulator tool, and we'll kind of squash this top out here. Cool. Let's save the image and test it in ZBrush with our matcap, just replacing the previous image. So if we're done with this, we'll hit Control S, and then we'll close that out. Here it is, our updated one, Control Shift S. We'll change this to a JPEG here, and we will save it over this test purple. Cool. Go back into ZBrush. Instead of going into the texture, we'll just go right into here, go to Import, grab your new one, updated. There we go, look at that. Comic book style. Reference, matcap image. Looks pretty close, man. It was pretty decent given the amount of time you can spend creating the images in Photoshop. It's also looking very close to our reference images, and you can quickly tweak any of the colors, size, and shapes of the layers and completely change the matcap really fast. If you think that the model is looking too flat, for instance, you can add a tiny bit of shading to define the volume a little bit more. Oh, cool. So I prefer the flat look as it resembles a comic book style, but if you want to add a little bit of color shading transition here, we can assign some inner shadows and set it to multiply and save a new image. Create an image in Photoshop. Okay, so flat at shadow. Create a new white circle. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back into Photoshop. Let's just do that real quick. So a new white circle here. Let's double click to edit this. And we'll take this ellipse here. I'm going to duplicate this off the black one that we made originally. Go up here. And for this fill, I'm going to do just white. Hit enter. And assign some inner shadows and set it to multiply. So if we double click this ellipse, over here in the blank area here, we can do an inner shadow. So we'll do inner shadow here, select that, so we can go to the parameters here, and blend mode is set to multiply, and you can kind of see what we're doing is we change that distance, and the choke, it will make it harsher or softer, and then the size will kind of blur it out. So if we do that, and then we can take this blending mode here and go into multiply, whoops, multiply, that kind of gives us a soft, subtle gradient here. So let's go ahead and if we double click inner shadow now, that'll take us directly to these. Let's go ahead and really crank up that distance here so we can kind of see what it's doing. Okay, and if you don't want it to affect your highlight here, just drag this specular and just put it on top here, so that way it won't affect that sharp highlight, but it'll kind of affect the shading on the other stuff. So once we're good with that, go ahead and hit Control S, close that out, and then we'll do Control Shift S, save as a JPEG here, and then we'll do test soft. Okay, go back into ZBrush here, grab this one, import test soft, and now you can see we're getting a soft kind of gradient. Not under, it's under the specular, but it's going to affect the top parts and the bottom parts of this colors here. Cool. Everybody good? I think we're getting very close to a particular style we're aiming for. All we did in this section was create an image in Photoshop. Yep. Now I'm going to tweak our material. So now we've done the heavy lifting in Photoshop, and now we're going to use the material settings within ZBrush to kind of tweak this out a little bit. At this point, it's good if you're around 70% happy. Switch back to ZBrush and make sure your recently created image loaded in the matcap. Double check all the modifiers are set to default values. So I think we're good. Everything looks like it's zeroed or one'd out. So remember I said we can change the thickness of the outline. We can do that within ZBrush without drawing a new image in a thicker border in Photoshop. Okay. I'll show you what the most modifiers we can do, but not in particular order. We'll start with the ones that affect the shape of the contours. So the depth and orientation. You notice that depth A and depth B right here same goes for most attributes, and that's because you can have it individually change the way the raised, so the raised is A and the recessed is B areas look in a matcap. So what depth does is visually change the elevation on the surface of your model without altering the geometry here. So if we go from this model here and we go back to our matcap gray, and then we do, let's see, so we've got depth A, so we do depth A of 0.6, and then we do a depth of 1.2. You're going to see it's just causing those transitions to kind of get a little bit more contrasty here, so we'll set that back to 1. Let's change the outer line so it covers a larger area in the comic book matcap by moving the depth A to something like 1.5. So let's go back to our comic book shader here. Where did that? There it is. We changed our matcap red wax. Boom. Okay, so with depth A at 0, this is what our character looks like. And then depth A at 1.5. So we keep cranking that up. There we go. So it's kind of getting our colors a little bit muddier, but it's also increasing the contrast and changing that outline a little bit more. So we'll do, again, 1.5. Looks like the colors are being duplicated and overlapping. That's because depth B is still set at 0. So yeah, now we're, so this specular is now being duplicated and muddied a little bit. A couple ways to fix this. Easiest is just giving, and if we want to smooth this out a little bit, hit Control D, and that'll go ahead and make a subdivision. That'll kind of smooth those lines out. Just giving the same value to depth A and depth B. So if you don't want that duplicate look going, let's change depth B to 1.5, and that'll go ahead and bring in the outline and not have that kind of staggered, posterized, muddy effect. The other way is to set the color of B at the bottom to black and just increase the intensity of A. For now, we'll stick with a simpler way and give the same value to A and B whenever we modify a slider. So whenever we're modifying A, we'll go ahead and match B unless, again, you want that posterized look. Man, this looks so cool. I love it. If you use the same values but in the negative numbers, you should get the same effect with the colors upside down. So remember when we were flipping in the original one, if you do depth A at negative 1.5 and then depth B at negative 1.5, now the specular went from up here to down here because it basically flipped our image. So we'll probably set this back to 1.5. There we go. Might be useful if you want to invert the direction of light where the highlights are placed, but I'd rather not use the negative values here and use the orientation slider instead. Okay, so you'll get the same result. So the orientation slider, orientation A and B. Before we move on the orientation slider, I would remind you that if you want the opposite effect in the outline of your model, that is thinner line, you just need to do the smaller values in the depth slider, like 0.5. So instead of 1.5 for the thicker, do 0.5, and that'll give you a thinner outline. Orientation A and B are basically a control that allows us to rotate the image of the matcap. So here's our image right here, and therefore orient the lighting. So if we want the little green highlight right here move slightly from the top to the right, all I need to do is put an orientation slider as a value of 45 and then 45 degrees. So orientation A, 45, orientation B, so we don't get the overlap, 45. And now you can see it took this image and just rotated it 45 degrees. Pretty neat. Now let's say I'm not 100% happy with the colors. Rather than update the image in Photoshop, I can simply change the hue of the image, changing all the colors at the same time. Hue slider in the modifier subpalette. So here's the modifier subpalette. Here's the hue sliders, hue A and B. I use this, it works in the same way as hue, saturation, adjustment in Photoshop. And you can also modify the saturation intensity of the color in the same way as you would in Photoshop. So you can change the hue, and you're probably going to want to keep A and B the same, and then the saturation, you can crank this up. The intensity, you can crank that up, and kind of start dialing in these changes as needed without going into Photoshop. So if you want to do variants within ZBrush and just keep a same Photoshop base, that's probably the way to do it. Cool. If you're happy with the matte cap, you can save the matte cap from the material palette and also save the texture with all the modifications we just did. So we already saved the Photoshop file. Let's see. Oh, and if you did any of these texture modifications here, so you can go over here to Material Save, and that'll save the matte cap here. And at the bottom of the modifier sub-palette, there is a Create Matte Cap Texture. So if you go ahead and click that, that'll force this out as a texture, and then you can export this as a OpenEXR or a TIFF, and you can kind of load that into whatever you like. Alrighty, how are we doing on time? 7:49. I think this is a good place to stop. So, so far so good. I am recording this, so I'm going to go ahead and throw this on my channel. Again, if you want to follow along, here is the direct link here. And if you want to go to my YouTube channel here, where it's going to end up eventually, I'm going to put it on the live stream. You know what? I'll just make a whole new playlist. It'll be like comic book styling with Pablo Munoz Gomez. Cool. So now, you know, I've got 10 minutes left. Let me go through let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and kill that. We'll start where we left off here and see if there's any last minute stuff I can do before I head out. Let's go ahead and do preferences, initialize ZBrush. Okay. Whew. That's a lot of talking. I'm going to start from the bottom up here. So, cool. Can ZBrush send a multi-subtool gun from a pose position to world center, do mods, and then send back with one click? ZBrush send a multi-tool world center, do modification, send back. You can with Transpose Master. You can do Transpose Master and then move it and then send it back. Let me think. Sorry, my brain's gone. Yeah, anytime you're dealing with multiple subtools, Transpose Master is probably your best bet. And then you can zero out the positions. Now, saving your position, that's a tough one. So usually what I do in that case, so I'm going to load my tool here. Let me see, Commander ZBrush. So with this one here, load it up, load it up. There we go. So you're going to see this guy here. He has his gun arm over here to the right. And while I was modeling this gun arm, this is actually just a placeholder, I think. So yeah, this thing is all just one huge decimated mesh. So what I actually have is two files going. I have the body file, and then I have the Commander ZBrush, and then we have the weapon file here. So in the weapon file here, this one is at 000, and this is because I'm dealing with hundreds and hundreds of subtools here. So you're going to see there's a ton of subtools in here and a ton of subtools in here. So instead of trying to juggle those and trying to model this on an axis, which probably would be easier with the new gizmo, so I have this one right here at the center of the world, 000. If I turn on the floor, you're going to see he's right there, smack dab in the middle. So I can model across symmetry and do all the time-saving radial techniques. Again, with the new gizmo and the new deformation stuff, it isn't so necessary, but it's still kind of nice to work at 000. So I have this working file, and then I can just do a merge visible, decimate down, and then I can throw this into this file. It's not one button click, but when you're dealing with massive amounts of subtools and resolution, it might be an option for you to kind of check out. And that way I have the placeholder here for his gun arm to make sure that all the body is syncing up with the gun perfectly. So there won't be any surprises. So that's one option there. There's probably some fancier ways I'm just not thinking about right now. You can go to, yeah, like the whole, like we were talking about, Z plugin. Let's kill that there. If you do the Transpose Master, that'll take your object, make a temporary copy and then you can manipulate all you want, and then when you go to T-post sub, that'll throw it back and it'll update all your subtools here. So any modifications you made to any individual part will go back to the original subtool. But I mean, that can be a little bit hairy, and you can put things back kind of. If it's tilted like this, you can't. If it's just off in the space pointed directly at you, you can go in here to, let me see if I remember how to do this. Transform. Under transform, there's a point selection mode. No, it's a center. So S pivot, set the pivot, and the center pivot here. You can also just turn on L symmetry. That's a tough one. I'd have to think about that one. And 4R7, okay, so this, since we're, does the material blend radius work in 4R8? Oh, blend two materials on a single object. Okay, so now I remember what that is. So over here, let's go ahead and do some of this. So we're going to sphere 3D, and we're going to go to initialize here. We're going to do H divides down to like 64. So we're going to get kind of a chunky, actually, let's do even lower. There we go. So something like this, make a polymesh 3D. So now if you start poly painting or painting materials, it's actually going to be pretty ugly. So if we go in here with our standard brush, turn our focal shift down to -100, and we do MRGB, and we choose, let's do matcap gray. So we'll go ahead and do just a color fill object with MRGB, and then we'll do something like reflect red, and we'll just kind of paint. You can see how alias that is. So when you go over here, render, oh man, it's been a while. Render properties, there's a anti-aliasing. No, that's, let me see, is it down here? Display properties, BPR settings, BPR material blend at 0. Huh. So the BPR material blend, you used to be able to crank that up and then hit BPR, and it would blend the transition between these two materials. Oh, I forgot we have the light being weirdo here. 10.85 ambient 3. Weird. You know what? Let's restart ZBrush here. We took it through the ringer there back a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't look like I can change that material blend radius, if that's what you're talking about. Cool. And again, sorry, I'm about to head out here, so I'm going to go to the very top here and see if I missed anything. And again, I'll copy all these questions and we can hit it up on the next live stream where I go through and answer questions here, since we're doing the stylized rendering. Cool. All right, how are we doing on time? All right, I'll finish this one up. I'll finish this thought, and then I'll bid you guys adieu, and I'll get back to you next live stream. So I live stream on my channel Thursday morning, 6 a.m. or 4 a.m. PST to 6 a.m. PST, and then on Pixelogic's channel. If you want to see the Pixelogic videos, go to Stream Workshop. Here's the Pavlovich Workshop, and there's a lot of really, really good people there. There's the 21 episodes of the Pixelogic Workshop that I've done so far. But let's keep playing to this. I'll make polymesh 3D. And we've got MRGB selected, matcap gray, color, fill object, and then we'll just grab this reflected red, turn off polyframe here. Paint that in, do a BPR render. Okay, at least the BPR render looks like it's behaving normally. And then if we go down here to the display properties, BPR settings, BPR material blend does seem to be just maxed out at 0. Interesting. Weird. Sorry. Anyway, I'll go ahead and call it a day. Catch you guys on Tuesday on Pixelogic, and then next Thursday on my channel, and we'll keep moving forward with the ZBrush guides, and I'll capture your questions and throw them into a document. So you guys have a good day. Thanks for showing up, and I'll see you next time.